For these books, I don't actually have a proper category. I would call them specialist books because they have a very specific focus point, and you usually don't buy them to get an overview over the entirety of fashion. It's because you have a specific interest into something, either a type of fashion, a point of research you're doing, this kind of stuff. And I think I'm just going to go into detail again about these books. This is the History of Haute Couture. It's pretty much what it says on the cover. It goes through the history of haute couture chronologically, and it's a very detailed book. Personally, I have to say I only bought it for the first 2 or 3 chapters, but the rest was pretty good too, so I can't complain there. And it has many, many images, lots of explanations about how the designers changed fashion and their personal relation to fashion and the people who wore it, which is always very nice. This is 19th century fashion. Actually, it focuses on England, and this has a whole lot of background information about industrialization, the changing images of what a man's supposed to be like, what a woman's supposed to be like, how the world just changed by the fact that department stores opened and that there were steam engines and all this kind of good stuff. So if you're interested in the sociological aspects and also the economic aspects of fashion in that time, this is a really good book to have. I'm just fangirling over all the books here. This book is called Victorian and Edwardian Fashion, a Photographic Survey, and that's pretty much what it is. It's just pictures of people in their clothes. There are also little explanations who the people are, what they're wearing, why they're wearing it. And this is pretty interesting because it's not glamorized oil paintings of sovereigns, it's just people, middle class mostly, people who are rich enough to have their photo taken, but not rich enough to be famous for the most part. This one's called Fashion in Impressionist Paris, and that's pretty much what it is. It's Impressionist paintings and a little costume analysis and general analysis of the painting and the painter at the side. And it's quite interesting to look at fashion from the art perspective, although I have to say Impressionist paintings don't have a fondness of great detail, so it's not going to help you figure out what kind of lace to use, in case that's what you're wondering. This is Kimono by Liza Dalby, whom you might know by name because she consulted on the geisha movie, and she's very knowledgeable. So if they chose to do things, let's say, wrong, as far as you can do things wrong in a movie where you decide what you do, it was not for a lack of knowledge, it was because they chose to. And she's pretty good. This book explained so much about a kimono because she's coming kind of from an insider and an outsider perspective. As a Westerner, what does she know? But then she studied it, and also she trained with actual geishas for, I think, a year or maybe longer. So she's also a bit on the inside. So that's pretty interesting. If you're trying to get to the inside from the outside, this is the person to read. Like, for a Westerner who has never been to Japan, this is a pretty good book because she explained inside things from an outsider's perspective. That's what I'm going for. This book is called Fashion Victims. It's pretty recent, and it has everything from poisonous arsenic dyes in dresses to combustible combs that were made of cheap celluloid. All the good stuff. Fascinating read. Now here we come to the very specialist theoretical books. The one on the left is Ingenue in white. Very, very interesting. It's the musings of a costume designer for stage costumes, so it's very interesting to read her reflections on her own career and the costumes she did and the traps she fell into and how to design, how she approaches it. I think she's still active, actually. So that's very interesting if you consider doing some designing for the stage. And the one on the right is very, very theoretical. It's Wenn Frauen Männerkleider tragen. In English that would be When Women Wear Men's Clothing. It's by one of my favorite German writers on the subject of fashion, and it's about women in literature and some in reality who wear men's clothing and why and how they are perceived. And it's all very much, it's kind of tapping into this Germanistic thing where you kind of rub shoulders with philosophy. So she writes very well, considering I don't like that particular genre very much. And it's very interesting if you're trying to get into like the intellectual perspectives on transgenderism. This is the third category. I would call them biographies, but they're not. It's more like when one author chooses to write an entire book about either one very, very fashionable person in history or the designers themselves. And then that's one book. So they can be biographies, they don't have to be. Up in the left we have Queen of Fashion, which is about Marie Antoinette and her fashion choices, and it's so detailed and really food for thought, that's what I'd call it. Then we have two books that are very similar. It's Jane Austen Fashion and Fashion in the Time of Jane Austen. And I have a feeling that most people who write about the Regency period assume that people are only interested in it because they read Jane Austen or saw a Jane Austen movie, and that's pretty much the selling point of those books. They are great books, but you can start to see a pattern. Like, nobody enjoys Regency fashion because of Napoleon, you know what I mean? They just love Jane Austen movies most of the time. Not that I don't. So the name on top of the book was the reason I bought them. And they are very informative. Just they don't really give you the details. They give you a lot of Jane Austen quotes and pictures to accompany them, and they put the period into perspective, but very Jane Austen centric. Then in the left corner is Worth, Father of Haute Couture, which is another very good book. And then we have just Worth. They are both biographies of Charles Frederick Worth, the first couturier. The one on the left is very detailed, very well written, very objective even. The blue one, where I don't have the cover of, it's very old. I think it's like 60, 70 years old, and it shows there was a certain time in history where it was okay for a biographer to be extremely biased. Like, this lady was obviously a Worth fangirl, and I get that completely, but gushing about how attractive his little children were and how good looking the entire family was and how Worth pretty much invented everything that there was, it's not too objective, but it's an interesting read. So if you can read something critically, you can get a lot out of this book, but if you can't, it's probably just going to cause a lot of stereotypes in your head. So, and then the last one, by the same lady who wrote the book about cross-dressing females, is a book about Coco Chanel and Elsa Schiaparelli. And this one was very surprising find. I'm not too into Chanel. I used to like her quite much, but no, I don't anymore. And this one focuses on how those two ladies had lots of catfights with each other, and this is a side that you don't see of Chanel a lot. If you're realistic, the most written about designer probably is Chanel. Like, every year there's like 2 new books coming out. But this one is from a different angle. It's not about how she is like a feminist or Nazi sympathizer or something. That gets dug up every 5 years or so. Or how she was so stylish. This is really just about the relationship those two women had and how different they were, and for that it's a pretty good read.